Welcome back to Finding Flow, the podcast where we explore the personal journeys of leaders, founders, and investors who are building remarkable careers while staying grounded and aligned. Today's guest has led iconic luxury and fashion brands across Asia for some of the world's most respected companies. He's currently the president of Marc Jacobs Japan, and prior to that, had leadership roles at DFS, LVMH, Gucci, Apple, Carter's, and Ralph Lauren. His career spans over 2 decades, blending Western and Eastern business cultures while building high performing teams and delivering outstanding customer experiences across the luxury retail sector. It's such a pleasure to welcome Richard Gustafson to Finding Flow. Richard, thank you so much for joining today. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me. And man, I was wondering who it was you were describing in that intro, but I guess that's me. But I hope I can live
Yeah.
up to the expectations here.
No, 100%. I mean, your experience is really fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about it. So I suppose to kick things off, let's go back to the beginning. What first drew you into the world of retail and leadership, and also how did your journey ultimately lead you to build a career in Japan?
Yeah, great questions. Well, I don't think I've ever told anyone this story, actually. I'm not necessarily anyone's really going to be interested, but when I was a kid, I was maybe a little different in a lot of ways. One thing was I remember from an early age playing with my best friend Taylor at his house,
Yeah.
and this was back in the late '70s, early '80s. I'm dating myself, but his house had at the time what was like a super modern layout, and they had a kitchen,
Mhm.
like an open kitchen with a bar counter, and I thought that was the coolest thing. And one of my
Yeah.
favorite things to do, and I guess hopefully you won't dislike me for saying this about him too, but we like to play store and restaurant. And so I was always
Mhm.
fascinated by restaurants and stores and just this idea that, you're providing hospitality and service to people. And I always got something out of just the idea that something that I could do would make someone else happy. We'll talk about it maybe later too, but I also loved
Mm.
music for the same reason because music is
Okay.
something that you can share to people and hopefully they enjoy it and it makes their life a little bit better. So I guess I got an interest, who knows, nature versus nurture, but from a young age, I had this interest. And just, I guess that was always there. And later on in life, I went to music school for undergrad and ended up in a music related field, but not as a musician, but with a company that was doing music retail. So in the days before Amazon was ever in the music industry selling music, they were only selling books at the time. The
Mm.
company I was working for, which started out as N2K Entertainment, was later bought by CDNow.com. I got my start in retail online because of my music background. So I didn't know anything about retail, but because I
Well,
had a music background, I got hired into this company. So you may be wondering about the Japan angle. So Japan was an interesting thing. When I was 15 years old, and I grew up in West Lafayette, Indiana, the home of Purdue University, for those that are familiar with it.
mm.
A very large Japanese manufacturing company moved into my town. It's called Fuji Heavy Industries. Some
Mhm.
people may know them indirectly as they're the ones that produce Subaru cars, for example.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, my town decided, and this is just normal public high school, they decided that it'd be a great addition to the curriculum to have a Japanese course.
Mhm.
I wasn't really that interested in doing it, but at the time when you had to sign up for what courses you were going to take the next semester, a good friend of mine sort of dared me to take Japanese.
Mm.
And in a moment of weakness, I said, "What the heck?" I was already taking Spanish, but yeah, how much harder can Japanese be? So I signed up for it, showed up for the first day of classes in the fall, and in walks this, 6'2", blonde-haired, blue-eyed Caucasian, and
Yeah.
we're thinking, sorry, I mean, not trying to be too stereotypical, but we weren't really
Yeah.
expecting that particular
Mm.
profile from our Japanese teacher. His name is Chris Thompson. We're best friends to this day, and his native language was a dialect of Japanese spoken in Hiroshima, which some
Okay.
people know from the unfortunate things that happened at the end of World War II with the atom bomb. But it turns out
Mm.
he grew up there because his parents were Christian missionaries after the war, helping the local populace. and he never learned English until he was like 16 years old. So here's this
Wow.
amazing, role model for us that,
Yeah.
didn't even speak a word of English until later in life. And his life story was so fascinating. So I was just
Mm,
captivated by him, his life story, by how completely everything about the culture and the language could not have been more different. And
mm.
I was hooked immediately. It was the only thing I could think about, and I just fell in love with, just this just got obsessed with everything Japan.
Mm.
So when I got, out of school, I got the opportunity, as I mentioned, to work for this company. They were opening up in Japan, got an opportunity to come out here and help start up the business. So that's the long story short, I guess. Not so short, but
That's amazing. I think Japanese. Honestly, I think Japanese is such a beautiful language as well. And also the culture. I mean, I've never been, but it's definitely on my list of places to go to. So yeah, that's a really amazing story. And I suppose I also wanted to ask, you've managed teams across multiple brands, countries, and business models. So what are some of your core leadership principles that have helped you build and sustain high performing teams throughout your career?
yeah, well, I think I'm very blessed to get the opportunity to speak to a number of different groups on this topic, and various executive MBA programs and such. And I was just speaking to a group recently, a few weeks ago, from Canada, and was asked this exact question. And I think
Yeah,
I preface anything that I say about this by saying that although Japan is different and unique in many ways, the things I'm going to say don't apply just to Japan. They apply,
yeah,
I believe. I haven't lived everywhere, but I've lived, a couple places at least, and I
mm,
think they're universal, just values around leadership.
sure,
And I very deliberately choose the word leadership over management, and I think that's a
mm,
fundamental distinction to draw. Is when you talk about managing people versus leading people, some people may envision that as you're sort of in charge of corralling them, and there's an element of um sort of one way communication about that.
yeah,
Maybe not everyone thinks that way. For me, it just sometimes it has that nuance. So I prefer to think about leadership, and the idea there is, first of all, a very important feature is leading from the front. Leading from the
mhm,
front means that you're out there, you're willing to put in the work in pursuit of the goals that have been set. You're willing to line up with others, roll up your sleeves, invest your sweat equity. And I think that's where you have to start. And again, I'll probably repeat it a few times throughout the conversation, but I think that's a universal truth about leadership, about working with people in general. And, I found that you can apply it in your work, you can apply it in your personal life.
mm,
We all respect someone that's willing to do the work along with you more than someone that is only sort of directing and sort of pushing it one way. So that's something I learned through a lot of trial and error. And I'll tell you,
mm,
I'll give a story. One of my earlier companies, Ralph Lauren. This is an interesting story. I'll try to keep it short, but Ralph Lauren for many years was managed by a very large Japanese company in Japan called Onward Kashiyama. Um,
okay,
I came into the organization before Ralph Lauren took back the direct operations. There
mhm,
was a big takeover that happened. It wasn't a leveraged buyout, but it was a tender offer that was placed, and eventually Ralph Lauren bought the company. And I went from running a small part of the Ralph Lauren business, the licensing part of it, to overnight being put in a very important job with a lot of, thousands of people.
mm,
And the introduction of me to the team that I was going to be leading was by the outgoing president. And he had just found out that he was the outgoing president. So one of his last jobs was to introduce me to the team. And you couldn't have asked for a worse introduction. The introduction was, "This is Richard. If you don't do what he says, the same thing will happen to you that is happening to me, i.e., being
wow,
pushed out of the company." So I could not have started on worse footing with that team, and
mm,
found it very important to develop a lot of rapport and relationships with people in a short amount of time. And
mm,
so I it's not like I had a monopoly on truth on these things at the time, but I just discovered through a lot of trial and error that this is a truth. You have to be willing to do the work, sit with people, sit there and until the wee hours of the morning in some cases,
mm,
to get things done. Show that you're willing to be vulnerable, authentic, humble. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think that's so important is this concept of inputs versus outputs. And I talk about this a lot in business. So oftentimes we get caught up in the output. And let me give an example of, like, if you're a marathon runner
mm,
and you have a question for your coach, which is, how can I be a better runner? And if the
yeah,
coach's only answer is to say you should run faster so your time will be better,
mm, mm,
that's not a very helpful or insightful bit of coaching there. And so
yeah,
in business, we do this all the time. Sales are bad, so make sales better, sell more, right? It's
yes,
such a simplistic thought process. But if we could, we all want to sell more. Of course, we want to sell more. We know that's what's expected. But problem is, we don't know how to do that right now. Or how do we get
yeah,
around this problem that's preventing us from selling more? So it's an example of an output, in this case, sales or a marathon runner's, time versus the input. And the inputs for a marathon runner, I'm not a marathon runner, but it might be
yeah,
things like diet, training
mm,
regimen, sleep, meditation, all these different inputs. In business, in every different industry, in my business, retail, it could be things about, do people understand the vision? Do they understand the latest, product that's been launched?
mm,
Are they inspired by the direction that you're trying to take the company? All these things play into the ultimate output, which one of them in retail is sales. But that
mm,
comes at the very end after you've done all of the inputs, either or well or not well. The output is whatever the sales number is. And so
yeah,
focusing on the things that provide the output, the inputs, is really, really important. And it's such a simple, input versus output. It's so simple, but I'm just shocked endlessly at how many companies, how many leaders, how many teams um, just miss the simple truth. So those are two things that I think are really important.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, I suppose like in order to get there, it's about the process of getting there, and that's like what you're doing on a daily basis. That's the fundamentals of like what you need to focus on and work on and build, in order to eventually get to that output. So I like the way you put it there, inputs and outputs. Um, very,
Yeah,
very
and
good.
if I were to
Yeah,
add one more, a third to that too, if I may, I
sure.
think what's so important, the ultimate input though, and again, this is so overlooked as a part of just, let's say, leadership. I don't want to use a word like methodology, but just leadership in
Mm, mm,
general, is how you make people feel.
mm,
And in especially in today's world, I think people have more options than ever in terms
yeah.
of pursuit of a career. There's all sorts of professions now that 5 years, 10 years ago didn't exist. Many of them involving, social media, YouTube, and
Mm,
there's so many different choices that people have. And 50 years ago, 100 years ago, people, I think, were much more dependent upon their employer. Now they're not. And I think young people, especially, are looking for not just a job, but they're looking for an experience, something that
mm,
truly fits their lifestyle, where they feel comfortable, where they can grow, where they can learn. And so it's more important. It's not that it ever wasn't important. It's just now it's more important because the employers have less of a stranglehold on their employees. And I think that's a good thing. But
mm,
it means that if we don't get our act together and really think about the employee experience, how we want our employees to feel, what we
mhm.
want, that to be, so that they can contribute, so that they bring the best versions of themselves, their best
Yeah,
creativity, because they want to every day to work. If we don't do that, then I think that puts you on the losing side of the modern age. So I think
yeah.
that's a very important element that we can't ignore as leaders also.
100%. And it's actually a very healthy thing because at the end of the day, it's making everyone better. If everyone's feeling good, if everyone's feeling their best, it's pushing them to be their best self, you know? Um, so
Percent.
I really appreciate that. And I suppose also given your experience managing luxury fashion and tech brands, what do you believe makes for great customer experience? So especially in today's omni-channel world.
Yeah, well, ironically, what I just said about employees is exactly the
Yeah.
methodology that applies to customers as well. In fact, this is
Mm,
something Apple does fantastically well, and Apple
mhm,
really starts. Um, in terms of the product development cycle, in terms of the customer experience, with the simple question of what do we want people to feel? And this
Mm,
is something that dates back to Steve Jobs. And I think that's such an easy, such a simple concept, but is so often overlooked. What do
yeah.
you want people to feel when they walk into an Apple store, any business, when they interact with you? What do you want them to feel? And design
Mm,
your products around that, design your experience around that. So I think that's the most important thing, is to start with those first principles of values, rather than trying to say, well, stores should be like this, or should be, who's to say what your store or your business should look like? It depends on what you want people to feel.
mhm.
But it should be something positive. It should be something memorable. And the simple adage that, long after people, I think this is a Mary Angelo quote, but,
Yeah,
people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
yeah.
And that's really important to remember. I think in my
Mhm.
business also, customers are much more likely to spread bad news about your company than they are to spread good news. So if
Mm,
what is it? If a customer that has a bad experience on average tells 10 people about it. If they have a good experience, they on average tell two or three people about it. Um, so
mm.
keeping those things in mind, taking feedback seriously, designing that experience around the emotions you want people to feel, and remembering that it's very hard to recover from a bad incident. It just spreads much more quickly. Those things will be great guiding principles in terms of a great customer experience.
Yeah, I really like that. Uh, on Finding Flow, we often talk about how leaders stay grounded while navigating demanding careers. So, what helps you personally stay balanced and focused while operating at such a high level?
Wow. Gosh, I wonder if my wife would say if I'm balanced and grounded and focused or not. But the most important thing for me is choosing the right situation to be in. It sounds funny,
Yeah.
but I find it difficult to stay focused and balanced if I'm not having fun doing what I'm doing.
Mm,
And not every day is easy, right? Not every day is an easy day, not every day is a fun day. But I guess it's about pursuit of virtue, a sense of achievement, working towards a goal. So for
mm,
me, it's very difficult if it's not the right situation. And so what I tell my kids and anybody that's interested is, just in life, do whatever the next most interesting thing for you is. And I think if you follow that simple principle, most days, are going to be better than worse. And you'll find it easy to be focused because you're having, if not fun in every moment, you're doing something that's satisfying you, that's hopefully that you have a sense that it's pushing you towards some sort of virtuistic goal that you want to achieve.
mm.
So that's what I'd say. But I could say a couple other things. I mean, it's and this won't surprise anyone to hear it. Obviously, it's very important to take care of yourself, eat well. You got to have a
Yeah.
lot of stamina, mental and physical, to because the big jobs are jobs that a lot of people want, and you have to be able to work hard and focus and stay with it. So those things are important, but I've just never found it possible to overcome not having a true internal passion or interest or desire to achieve in a particular job, by being in shape or eating well. Those things
Yeah.
support you, but for me, I've just got to have that innate interest and passion. And for me, I'm a problem solver. I like challenges. I love coming into things with lots, we could say, that are broken, but maybe the right way to say it is where there's lots of opportunity, and
Yeah.
especially where I have broad latitude to really be creative and affect the change. Those are the things. And then, especially in my industry, when it's retail and it's a company that makes products that I personally really find exciting, that's a good recipe for me. Maybe not for
Sure.
everyone,
Mm,
but those are some of the recipe elements for me that make it just a great environment where I can work hard, and then that's supported
yeah.
by taking care of myself, and so
Yeah, I suppose that if it gives you a sense of purpose, then even on tough days, it's giving you some purpose. So it's worth it almost, you know. So yeah, I really like that. And I suppose I know you've worked with many different teams across luxury, retail, tech, and global corporations. So, what have been some of the biggest mindset shifts or growth lessons that have shaped your leadership style?
That's a great question. Thank you. A huge change in my career came in going to Apple.
Yep.
And to be clear, I was head of Apple retail for Japan, which
Mm,
was so different in so many ways. And first of all, it was a really just huge business. I mean, we only had a handful of stores, but each one of those stores just turned out incredible sales. Apple, as Apple is a company that um, thinks from the ground up. So just because when they entered the retail business, th- uh, maybe they looked around at what other retailers did, but they did a lot of just innovation on their own. Like, how should it
mm,
be? How should
mm,
retail work? What do we want people to feel?
mm.
And so everything was so different there, based on prior experience in other retail companies. And the biggest thing and the life-changing aspect of working for Apple was just the incredible focus on people. And again, it goes back to inputs and outputs, and people are the biggest input. And the amount of time that we spent, and I'm not complaining, I think it was the biggest learning, focusing on people, their individual development as leaders, um, the customer experience. We would have deep, deep, deep ideation around how people should queue up for iPhone launch day. Literally, that was like a whole thing. Like,
Mm,
how are we
mm.
gonna manage the queue on iPhone launch day, and what types of things could happen during that queuing process that would cause us to change strategy? And I mean, and it
Well,
sounds like such a mundane thing for normal people, maybe it should be, but it's an example of this obsession of the customer over the customer,
yeah.
obsession on the experience. So my whole thought process around how a business should be led, especially a retail business, which up to that point was very output focused,
Mm,
completely shifted to this input focus. And actually, what was incredible to me was that oftentimes leaders think that, well, people, yeah, we need to have a people focus. No one would say you don't need a people focus, but
mm,
just watch what happens when the sales are a little bit tough. Whether they
mhm.
say it or not, the knee jerk reaction is, well, we'll do that a little bit later. Let's get the sales
Yeah.
fixed first. But the
Yeah,
reality is,
exactly. Yeah.
but no, you're right. It's like again the marathon runner. Like, if you're not
Mm,
sleeping and you're eating junk food and you're not taking care of yourself, your time's not going to get better. So it's like, yeah, I'll
yeah.
just change my diet and my exercise regimen after my time's a little bit better. No, it's
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
so that was the big unlock for me. And
Mm.
everything after that, it just I approach very differently. And it makes you a bit of a renegade in our industry, and a lot of people don't get it. But for me, it was life-changing as a leader, and I'm so thankful for having had that experience. And Apple's not the only company where I think you can learn that, but it's one great place that I think many people do have that unlock occur for them.
Yeah, and it sounds like an amazing experience. I mean, talking about the queue, I suppose all of those little things, like being like obsessed with all of these little things, making the experience as good as possible, they all add up. I suppose making it into something incredible, an incredible brand and an incredible experience, because it is an incredible experience. Like going to Apple, you can see there's a
Yeah.
lot of work behind it.
Every little detail, every little detail of the entire what they call the customer journey, which is not a unique
Yeah,
word, but Apple takes it. I mean, we
yeah, yeah.
obsessed over every step of it, every aspect of the checkout process, um, every every position of every product on every shelf is
Mm,
it like, don't touch it. I remember one time I was like, hey, we
mm.
should move this like a normal retail. Hey, we should move
Yes.
this over here. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
No, everything has been thought out.
What?
Like, you don't touch it.
Yeah, yeah,
I was the
yeah,
country manager, but I can't move where
yeah.
the Beats headphones go on the shelf. It's like off limits.
Incredible. Incredible.
So it's excessive, but it's an amazing education.
Yeah, no, very good. And for those who are earlier in their careers or perhaps looking to step into international leadership roles, what advice would
Yeah.
you give them based on your journey?
Wow. Um, First of all, learn a language if you can, if
Yeah.
you have the capacity and the opportunity. And I think everybody can. I mean, it's so. fantastic to with the opportunity you have now with various apps that are available,
Mm,
even YouTube videos. And I say that not only because it's just great to speak another language, it opens up, more people that you can be friends with, but there's something really fundamental. There's a fundamental shift in the way your brain works.
mm,
Um, this for some scholars in the past, posited this idea that everybody's brain sort of work like the ideas you have are all the same. You just say them in different words if you're speaking a different language, but actually that's all been refuted, and it's been very strongly shown now in many different studies that actually the way that your brain works, the way that ideation happens, is very language dependent.
yeah,
And so learning a different language not only opens up a lot of new people and great amazing new cultures you can experience, but it changes something inside of you. And I can say that for
yeah,
myself for sure with Japanese. I had to learn how to think backwards because in many cases, the sentence, you
well,
have to get the ideas in the reverse order. You have to
mm,
think about, you have to be able to innately ascertain certain qualities of the other person, their social status with regards to you. There's so many different things that speaking English, you never have to think about. And so it
mm,
completely changes you as a person. That's the first thing. Learn a language because of what it does for your process and your ability to relate to others, and the way to and how it affects your ability and your approach to ideation.
mm,
Um, but I think also humility, authenticity, these are qualities that are so important when dealing with other countries, as we touched on a little bit before. Um, have work on your self-awareness, um, be able to work in team environments, be open to taking feedback. These are great qualities that will set you up to do that. But then those are sort of preparatory things, or things
mhm,
that you'll refine once you're in that situation. So how do you get into a situation like that? Um, a bit of it is luck. You can be a little bit more strategic now, and there's so many tools on the internet that allow you to look for jobs in other countries, and just go apply. Go apply
yeah,
for things. It's so easy to apply for jobs today, or find
mm,
someone that's in a job and ask them for some advice. Send them a text message through LinkedIn or any of these sites. Those are great ways to do it.
yeah,
Um, I would recommend, if you can, sometime in your career, to get that international experience, and
mm,
also to work for a small company and work for a big company. And I've done both, and you learn many different things at both of those types of companies. Small
mhm,
company, by definition, you get pulled into a larger range of things. And I was lucky to sort of do that early on. So I saw kind of how companies worked, or many of the dysfunctions that companies have. Um, Big companies, you can go deep in a certain domain, and you have a lot of great people, a lot of great processes that you can learn from. I think ultimately you need to have both of those if you want to be a leader, because as a leader, you have to in some really be a jack of all trades.
yeah,
You have to be able to do a little bit, or understand enough to be dangerous about a large range of different things. So those are also important experiences to have.
yeah. I think that's great advice. Like being able to work for both small companies and bigger companies to give you that full kind of context. Yeah. So no, that's very good. And I suppose like that's all of the questions I have. So I just wanted to thank you so much. It was such an insightful conversation. Really appreciate you coming to join Finding Flow. And yeah, I'll speak to you next time.
Thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate it. I think you're doing really amazing work with the podcast. So keep it up.
Really appreciate it, Richard. Thanks, eh?
Cheers,
Bye.
Kyle. Appreciate it. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.